Hello and welcome everyone to the NeuroTechX Buzz in Review series. This is the first day of our Buzz in Review Neurotech Tuesdays. And I'd like to first kick the series off by introducing NeuroTechX. NeuroTechX is the largest international community for neurotechnology enthusiasts in the world, reaching over 18,000 members in 60 local communities around the world. And we really focused on delivering leading initiatives such as our job board, NeuroTech's EDU, which brings educational programming in a very open source and accessible way, as well as the NTX Content Lab, where you can go to learn about all the developments in neurotechnology if you're coming from a beginner or if you're more of a seasoned enthusiast. And today, we have our Buzz in Review. This is our leading flagship event series, which we do every year. It kicks off each January, where we come together to present the latest and greatest neurotechnology news from the preceding year. This year, we are featuring Neurotech Tuesdays. This is an event series where each Tuesday, we have a new series or a new section of Buzz in Review, bringing exciting neurotechnology news. So please join us in real time for each of these events. Each covers a different section of the latest neurotechnology developments, and it will also be available on our YouTube channel after the event. So we will also have some time during each event for Zoom meetings and the NeuroBar afterwards, so we can come together and discuss a lot of what we just saw, what was just presented. So after the event, please join us for the NeuroBar to network, have a drink, and expand upon the information that we just absorbed. So I'm going to kick off now the first presentation series. This is going to be focused on developments of brain-computer interfaces. I'm joined today by Alex from the Neurotech Boston chapter. Also, just a quick introduction. My name is Mark Melnykowycz, and I'm from the NeuroTechX Zurich chapter. So, welcome to Buzz in Review, January 17th, 2023. We're kicking off day one with the topic, Harnessing the Brain. And we're going to start with industry and innovations, primarily about BCI's brain-computer interfaces. So, kicking off, number one, ThinkSync. This is a combination, a partnership between Magic Leap and ThinkSync. You might know Magic Leap as one of the very interesting XR augmented reality glass platforms. And they partnered with ThinkSync, where ThinkSync is a company where they had gained FDA clearance for an eye tracking VR device for assisting in the diagnosis of concussions. And they wanted to then utilize this technology in diagnostic capabilities and applications. And I think the partnership was really great because Magic Leap developed a really robust AR device and headset with really nice cameras for eye tracking. So it's a really nice way where you could take the technology developed by ThinkSync and bring it into the Magic Leap platform. So you can then essentially expand upon the use case. And I think we're going to see a lot more partnerships like this in the future, where providers of a technology, providers of a platform come together to create a new and exciting experience. Also, I think many of you might have heard about this in the past. This was a very exciting acquisition in 2022 when Snap acquired NextMind. NextMind was creating a very nice, accessible brain-computer interface, and they acquired them essentially as an acqui-hire so they could bring together neurotechnology into the augmented reality glasses which are being developed by Snap. So the Snap Spectacles, these AR glasses, and you're seeing this with a lot of industry players right now, developing AR glasses and then looking for new ways to bring better immersive technologies together with those AR glass platforms. So really excited to see what the final integration is going to be between AR and VR and EEG or BCIs. And if we take that a step further, Many of you may know the company OpenBCI. They partnered with a VR company called Vario, and essentially they're combining a ton of sensors on the face as well as on the EEG on the scalp, so that the BCI technology and SDKs, they have a Unity SDK, this can be combined with a VR and XR platform. So again, great technology platforms coming together. OpenBCI has been collecting a lot of orders over the past year, and now they're going to be shipping in 2023. I was at CES in Las Vegas. I got to see the Galea firsthand. Really excited to see it coming to market. I know there's a ton of companies buying it who are going to be exploring the beautiful marriage between BCIs and metaverse and just getting more interaction through the brain and through facial expressions with these platforms. So super exciting when they're going to be shipping that. Then we also had Interaction Muse, one of the oldest and most established players in the neurotechnology market, launching a new VR SDK. And the goal here is to really bring together the ability, again, for brain-computer interfaces plus a VR or XR experiences. And through an SDK, it's really nice way to integrate EEG or BCI capabilities into AR and XR and HMD platforms. It's going to be really interesting to see because sometimes you have incompatibility between putting electrodes onto the head and combining it with a device where they weren't designed to work together. But the Muse is a pretty small and adaptable system, so I'm interested to see what developers are going to be creating with these new technologies. Also, many of you are familiar with Facebook, then recently rebranded as Meta. They had recently, a couple of years ago, bought Control Labs, where they could do essentially EMG sensing on the wrist, and that was starting to open up a lot of capabilities for new interaction mechanisms where just small finger movements could be translated into the VR space or the XR space. And now they also recently bought Lofelt, which was essentially a Berlin startup that was bringing haptics into the wrist. And now if you combine this with things that are happening with MyoSuite, where they're building an AR platform to better understand neural and motor movements and essentially model the intelligence of the hand, you're really bringing together a few key technologies, which is interaction, feedback haptically, but also modeling of what's happening in the hand. So this is really going to allow them to make much more fluid and easy to use interaction mechanisms in the metaverse space. And now that we've covered some of the, let's say, easier to understand interactions with BCIs, Kernel, some of their latest technology, you might know Kernel is one of the most advanced BCIs that came onto the market recently, where they're essentially creating neuroscience as a service and making a very robust, very powerful BCI. And lately they've been developing different partnerships. One of them, Applied VR, is using the technology to measure chronic pain. And they've also been working with the Canadian company Cybin, which had been developing pharmaceuticals and also going through FDA approval for psilocybin. And also they've been combining the kernel with a ketamine study. The super interesting thing here is that it gives a new insight to more easily and at a very high resolution measure what's happening in the brain when you're going through these different treatments. So when you're looking at what is ketamine doing to the brain, what is it doing when you're also bringing in cognitive or behavioral therapy, it gives us a fully new dimension to understand what's happening during these treatments. And I'm really interested to see what the outcome of these studies and partnerships are going to be. Neurotech and XR and VR is really a big topic. We saw this a lot also at CES. And aside from just measuring what's happening in the brain, measuring what's happening with the facial features of a person is super interesting. Because when we think about the metaverse, whether we're talking about using hand control or using interaction of what's happening like subconsciously with the face, bringing these things together is also going to make a much more seamless metaverse experience for the future. So essentially what happened is a team of researchers from Australia and New Zealand helped to develop a technology to capture a person's smile or frown or clenching of the jaw. And then you can use these expressions to better target or trigger interactions in a VR environment. And then use neural processing techniques in an EEG headset to also recognize some of these facial expressions. And thereby, we're getting closer to essentially replacing handheld controllers or touchpads as the primary interaction mechanism in virtual environments. And when these things all come together, it's going to make it much more easy to seamlessly interact with interactive spaces. When I was at CES, one of the, I think, most significant neurotechnology releases was actually coming from LG. LG is a big consumer electronics company. They make a multitude of different devices, from robots to smart refrigerators. And they have released the first BCI earbud. So essentially developed a true wireless earbud system, which actually measures EEG from around the ear. Integrate this into our product. It includes feedback for essentially sleep, so that you can actually induce sleep or measure sleep using audio. So with an audio interaction or audio intervention, helping to maintain deep sleep and really understanding how to create better sleep environments. And the reason this is so significant is this is one of the first large electronic companies to release a BCI on the market, and doing it in a true wireless form factor, which hundreds of millions of people use every day. It's first being released in South Korea, and then they've reported that they have plans to come to the US market later in 2023. So this could really have a positive impact on BCIs and neurotech in general. Also, Eton Technologies had announced the release of the Guardian EEG earbuds and neurointelligence platform. So this is a really great advancement because they're bringing EEG into the ear canal and making a brain-computer interface that is very intuitive, very easy to use, together with a neurointelligence platform for neuromarker biomarker discovery. So this was first released, showing what's coming on the market, putting it into a closed beta, and with plans to scale and do a larger release in 2023. And looking forward to seeing how this will develop with the rest of the neurotech ecosystem. And now if we come back to something more high resolution, NeuroTechX partnering with BrainSpace. So this was an Israeli startup, and they wanted to develop a headset which is really adaptable for multiple people. If you've been working in neurotechnology, you understand that electrode contact between the scalp is one of the key differentiators to creating great signal quality. And this is really interesting because it makes sense of different human behaviors, for example, mood or cognitive load, etc. And by making a device which is also more easily adapting to the scope of the brain, it makes it easier to use. When it's easier to use, we can get it into more clinics or into different application areas. So they developed this brain monitoring headset, which could be worn by tourists on the AX-1 private mission to the International Space Station. And so it's measuring brain activity and can be worn by different crew members, like say 15 minutes twice per day. And the idea is to look at day-to-day plasticity changes in the brain in space to really better understand how our biology, how our organs are adapting to microgravity, radiation, and isolation. So this could really be a great platform for going forward when we start to think about going really far out into space, like to Mars, for example, and what we have to do to prepare environments for astronauts going forward. Also, when we start to now go away from non-invasive BCIs to more invasive systems, Synchron had developed and released one of the first social media messages using BCIs. So in a neuroprosthetic first, ALS patients were able to send multimedia messages or social media messages via the BCI. They then began a patient enrollment in October. And in December, they announced the raising of 75 million Series C by Arch Venture Partners and others. So what's really important about this is that the trial, which is being funded by National Institutes of Health, will primarily assess the safety of Synchron's Stentrode device. This is really a different type of electrode, which is similar to a stent, but it's also electrode form factor so it can get really close to the brain tissue area. So it's designed to restore functionality in patients with severe paralysis, allowing them to control digital devices. It's really an important milestone in the company's mission to advance technology access for people who have lost the ability to use digital devices. And this could really impact different tasks such as texting, emailing, online shopping. So bringing more interaction to people, if the trial is successful, could lead to a really more scalable BCI solution for the market, opening up really these new possibilities for interacting in a digital way without needing our hands or motor movements to accomplish it. Going forward, one of the amazing companies in neurotechnology is BlackRock Neurotech. In June, they announced BCI trials of an in-home system, and in November, they announced the NeuroLace, which is the 10,000 channel next generation BCI. This is really amazing because BlackRock Neurotech, they're really one of the leading implantable BCI technology companies on the market. By announcing the acquisition of a spatial computing software firm, XMind, they're moving to integrate the augmented reality and artificial intelligence technology with the BCI hardware that BlackRock has perfected. So again, it's really different companies coming together with unique characteristics to then create a much more robust and interesting neurotechnology solution. So BlackRock's existing software portfolio and positions the company to deliver this full stack integrated BCI products where we're not only sensing what's happening in the brain, but also interpreting it and then creating new solutions around it. And one of the desires is that this is really going to help push forward user-friendly software for neurointelligence as a service. And also NeuroLace, if I think about this as a material science point of view, it's really awesome because it's a very thin, adaptable, and more integratable and more implantable electrode system. So I'm really looking forward to the BCI solutions that are going to come out of this. Also, Bunker announced the acquisition of Inscopec for neuroscience research. So this new partnership between BlackRock Bunker Corporation, it's a neuroscience pioneer and market leader in miniaturized microscopes for freely moving animal brain matter and imaging. One of the great things that we've been doing as different corporations or companies is trying to get better understanding of the brain structure. And one way to do this is to do very high resolution microscopy. This can be very time intensive and very difficult because you have to take layers of brain matter and then really use a microscope to capture the microstructures of the brain, and then put this all together to then infer structural and functional relationships. So this acquisition enhances Bruker's strong reputation as a technology leader for in vivo functional imaging with the Ultima photon microscopes at the cellular level and with their preclinical MRI systems at the organizational level. So it's going to accelerate Inscopec's mission to enable better understanding of neurocircuitry and really underpinning brain function and behavior. And then ultimately, this will help to assist in the development of new and better neuroprosthetics by big pharma partners. So this could have a very foundational impact on neurophysiology or neuropharmacology over the coming years. And then one of the last great innovations I'd like to talk about, China and the BCI rays. So a lot of the technologies that we covered, they've been coming from companies based in the United States or companies in Canada or in South Korea. So now it's great to see also China contributing more to the rise of BCIs. In September, they announced the first invasive brain-computer interface device in Shanghai. And what I really love about this is that they're utilizing a silk protein electrode wrapping technology. So again, we are always looking for new electrode technologies that better accommodate and can accommodate to the various structures of the brain, because all brains are unique, and the ability to sense them with an adaptable sensor technology is really important. Also really amazing is that they raised 13.9 million in a pre-Series A round. So I can only imagine what they're going to be raising for the full Series A round as they're building this technology and going forward. And I love to see material solutions that are taking some of the best of biology and electrical engineering and bringing them together for a unique solution. So now I'd very much love to introduce Alex. Alex is coming from Neurotech Boston, and she is going to be presenting the Neurotech Industry and the Landscape overview for 2022.
All right, cool. All right, so today I'm giving a general overview of the neurotech industry in 2022. We've got a fun word cloud here, kind of embodying the space in 2022. If there are any questions about how it was generated, just feel free to ask me about it later. But in general, we took all the news articles presented in this talk, and we highlighted the most frequently noted words and concepts. So we can go on to the next screen or the next slide. So to start things off, here's a general overview of the industry in 2022. Before continuing, I'd like to thank NeuroTechX Services for collecting and organizing all of this data. I'll only give a very brief overview of the content here, but NeuroTechX Services will go into more detail on these stats later in our event. I'd also like to briefly note that these stats are meant to remain confidential, so please only use these numbers amongst yourselves. So a quick recap. In 2022, there were 274 deals made. This includes funding rounds or acquisitions. And in total, over $10 billion in capital was raised. The valuation numbers are both for both pre and post valuation were over 20 million and 40 million respectively on average. And on average, each deal was upwards of $5 million. So it's just, again, very general overview. And now we can talk a bit more about funding in 2022. You have to go on to the next slide. So 2022 was a busy year for funding. Back in January, Cognition raised $12 million for their product, Cognition One, which is the first brain-computer interface and augmented reality wearable speech generating device. Their device is designed to improve communication, access, and control for people with complex communication disorders. In March, MindMaze raised $105 million in a round of financing led by Concord Health Partners. They provide therapeutic solutions for a wide spectrum of neurological disorders within the realm of cognition and movement. Also in March, Epitel raised $12.5 million in a Series A round for developing REMI. REMI detects seizures and has already obtained FDA approval, so it shows lots of progress. Next slide, please. Thank you. Back in May, the Ontario Brain Institute announced $700,000 in funding for Canadian neurotech startups in their inaugural NERV program. In July, neurotech startup Canary secured over $4 million in seed funding to digitize the sense of smell and develop their scent sensing platform. And in August, Interaxon secured $9.5 million to roll out a subscription model for their popular brain sensing headband, the Muse. Interaxon also had their Series C round to support the rollout of a membership model for its wearable tech offering. Next slide, please. And later in 2022, Ceribell raised $50 million for an EEG headset designed to detect seizures. In November, Boomerang Medical raised $15 million in a Series A to advance their clinical studies on neuromodulation for the treatment of autoimmune diseases, with an initial focus on inflammatory bowel disease, or IBD. And finally, in December, as mentioned earlier, Synchron raised a whopping $75 million through backing by Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates for their brain implant breakthrough. Next slide, please. Now, moving on to new neurotechnology developed mostly in an academic setting, but with huge implications for industry. Next slide, please. So starting in March, March was a really big month for new technology in the neurotech space. To start, researchers at MIT developed a new MRI probe that can monitor individual populations of neurons and reveal how they work with each other. This new probe could potentially allow scientists to map the network of interactions between different parts of the brain, kind of similar to how clock gears interact with each other. With this new technique, researchers are able to identify neural populations in a circuit that responds to rewarding stimuli. Next slide, please. Also in March, Rice University researchers developed a new lensless microscope called bioflatscope, which is capable of monitoring biological activity that can't be captured by conventional instruments. This device is small and inexpensive, and it uses light to capture images that no lensed camera can use. And it can also show dynamic changes in the fluorescent tag neurons in running mice. Potential uses for bioflatscope include looking for signs of cancer or sepsis, or becoming a valuable endoscopy tool. And finally, in March, researchers at the Kavli Institute for Systems Neuroscience developed a portable open source 2-photon miniscope called Mini2P that can record live images of neural activity from thousands of neurons in freely moving mice. Mini2P is the first tool that allows researchers to study neural network activity at high resolution in naturally behaving animals and can be used to understand complex behaviors. It works by using 2 tiny bundles of light from a laser to precisely excite and register neurons, and has severable tunable lens that enables 3D structure recordings of brain tissue. Next slide, please. So moving on to May. In May, the Allen Institute, along with the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, the University of Washington, UCL, and IMEC, created a new way of eavesdropping on the brain with 10,000 electrical probes, which they call the NeuroPixel system. It functions like an imaging device, but records electrical fields rather than photonic fields. Early experiments with the NeuroPixel system, including some in humans, have been conducted to explore questions about the brain. To facilitate progress with this system and to encourage the use of NeuroPixels, the Allen Institute created OpenScope, which is a platform for high throughput and reproducible neurophysiology, which is open to external scientists to test theories of brain function. Additionally, this community has developed software to analyze large data sets generated by their brain probes, which is expected to enhance their platform. Next slide. And finally, in October, a new MRI technique called Diana was developed that can non-invasively track the propagation of brain signals on millisecond timescales. Funded by the National Research Foundation of Korea, Diana uses existing MRI technology to take quick-fire partial images and then combine them to create a high-resolution picture of active brain regions. This high-resolution direct imaging of neuronal activity will open up new avenues in brain science by providing a deeper understanding of the brain's functional organization, including the temporospatial dynamics of neural networks. Next slide, please. Okay, so that completes our section on new technology. Now moving on to new real-world applications that were developed in 2022. All right, so in February, a new inverse reinforcement learning approach came out to help customize skills for assistive robotic manipulators. The program adjusts the robot's movements based on electrical signals from the brain. The approach uses error-related potentials to improve the performance of assistive robotic manipulators by allowing them to adapt to the user's specific needs. And the hope is that with this invention, tetraplegic patients will be able to carry out more day-to-day activities on their own. Next slide, please. A recent study in March of last year has shown that 3 amputees were able to control individual fingers of their prosthetic hands using a new AI decoder that can interpret nerve signals with high specificity. The AI decoder uses a peripheral nerve interface, which involves a handful of implants within the nerves at the terminus of the amputated limb, which allows control of a prosthetic hand. They found sustained control of wrist and individual finger movements with 97 and 98% accuracy, which is really incredible. So this approach is considered an alternative to other existing systems, such as brain-machine interfaces that are based on cortical recordings or prosthetics based on muscle signals, as it allows for more natural and intuitive control of the artificial limb and quick processing. Back in May, a new open source platform out of Italy for neurorobotics was released called ROS Neuro. ROS, which stands for Robot Operating System, is an open source framework in C++ that aims to facilitate the software distribution, repeatability of experimental results, and support of a new community focused on neuro-driven robotics. ROS Neuro hopes to flourish in a newer generation of neurorobots by promoting the rehabilitation, inclusion, and independence of people with disabilities in their everyday life. And you can check out their GitHub link right at the bottom. Okay, moving on to the next slide. June. So in June, EEG Sim, a project out of Spain, created a new convolutional neural network for binary motor imagery classification with improved accuracy. This new deep learning method uses inception modules, residual connections, symmetry of the brain throughout the mid-sagittal plane to transfer learning across subjects and data sets. EEG Sim can achieve high accuracy results with amazingly only 16 electrodes, which allows the use of more inexpensive EEG recording systems and reduces setup and wear duration, which could eventually just increase a user's motivation for using MI-based BCIs for rehabilitation in the future. And also in June, researchers at the University of Copenhagen and the University of Helsinki developed a software that can perform image editing using only brain signals as input. Participants in the study were given tasks such as looking for female faces, looking for older people, people with blonde hair, etc. And then the software would edit images based on their brain activity. Possible implications of this could include medical imaging and assistance to certain groups of disabled people, but the researchers also note ethical concerns regarding the collection of individual brain signals. So the future of this technology is still to be determined. Next slide, please. In September, scientists at EPFL decoded the neural signals that encode walking in the brain. The study aimed to understand the complex regulation of lower limb movements during walking in individuals with Parkinson's disease by studying local field potentials in the subthalamic nucleus and leg muscle activation in Parkinson's patients with implanted deep brain stimulation electrodes. They used a neurorobotic platform based on a dynamometric chair and controlled locomotor tasks to study the subthalamic nucleic encoding of the initiation, termination, and amplitude of passive and active muscle activation and sensory feedback from the legs. Algorithms were designed using local field potentials from the subthalamic nucleus in order to distinguish functional from dysfunctional gait that could detect freezing gait in individuals with Parkinson's. The results of the study will help inform future treatment strategies for gait impairments in the disease. Next slide, please. In October, an interdisciplinary team of researchers, surgeons, clinicians, and engineers from institutions in Montpellier, France, developed a method for restoring functional hand movements in tetraplegic patients using Cortex multi-contact spiral epineural cuff electrodes for epineural stimulation. The team implanted the electrodes for a limited period of time in 2 patients and used them to stimulate the medial and radial nerves in the arm, which resulted in functional and powerful grasping movements that were stable over the course of the implantation and could be controlled using an intuitive interface. Despite this success, the patient's hands had to be supported by splints to maintain the wrist at a functional extended position, and the stimulation settings, as well as the interface, had to be individually designed and adjusted for each patient. That said, work continues to create a fully implantable solution without any skin breach for an assistive system that is suitable for everyday life. Also in October, researchers at the University of California, San Francisco, developed a brain-to-text system that can translate neural signals into words, allowing a paralyzed man to communicate by speaking through a computer. The team uses a combination of neurotech software and machine learning systems to decode brain signals and restore communication for people who have lost the ability to speak. It might be a bit hard to see in the photos, but in the first one, there is a paralyzed man who hasn't spoken in 15 years using a brain-computer interface that decodes his intended speech 1 word at a time. This technology is still in the early stages of development, and the research team is working to make it safe, stable, and reliable enough for everyday use at home, as well as improving the system's performance. And last but not least, we had some advances in assistive technology throughout the year. In February, a novel wearable armband that helps users of prosthetic hands get a better grip on objects used haptic touch sensation feedback, electromyogram control, and an innovative wearable soft robotic armband to improve grip. Findings from the study could help the way current and future artificial hands are controlled by those without limbs. And finally, in October, researchers from Singapore invented an interactive mouth guard that controls electronic devices by biting. Individuals who have limited hand function can soon have a simple way of controlling devices such as computers, smartphones, and wheelchairs by wearing a smart mouth guard that translates complex bite patterns accurately and quickly into instructions to control electronic gadgets, which is pretty cool. And that, if you just continue to the next slide, is the end of the day 1 presentation. So now I think we can just move into the Q&A portion.
Yes, it's very interesting to see what's been developing over the past year. Is there any feedback, any questions from the audience?
And of course, if there are no questions, or if people think of questions towards the end, we are going to have Q&A sections for the following 2 presenters. So if any new questions pop up that people didn't get a chance to think of for this portion of the talk, they can always ask later. Should we continue with the next portion, or do we have any questions? So up next, I'm going to introduce Ben Woodington, co-founder and CEO of Opto.bio. Ben received his PhD at the University of Cambridge, where he studied polymer bioelectronic interfaces. And as CEO of Opto.bio, he is working on developing a newly funded startup for developing minimally invasive products for understanding and treating diseases of the brain. So without any further hesitation, here is Ben. Welcome, Ben.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Give me a thumbs up. Excellent. Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Mark. It's nice to be back at NTX. I've been involved in NTX for a few years now, and sadly, I went completely off the radar for the last few months whilst I was finishing up my PhD. I'll just see if I can share screen. Again, Alex, can you just give me a shout if you can see?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. So hello, everyone. I'm kind of here wearing two hats today. I'm representing, I guess, the bioelectronics lab at the University of Cambridge, and also Opto.bio. Opto.bio are actually in a kind of pseudo stealth operation mode at the moment. We'll be releasing some news and some data over the next couple of months. But I can't say no to NeuroTechX. It's always too exciting to come here and get my yearly download of what's been going on. I guess a little bit about me. I'm a medical device developer historically. I was working in a number of different fields, but primarily in active medical devices for a while, until coming back into academia, where I was focused on neurotechnologies for about 4 years, primarily focused on the spinal cord. I'm going to show you a little bit about the kind of technologies that we build in our labs in Cambridge, and I'll give you a tease of what we're doing at Opto.bio. If you want to know more about Opto.bio, feel free to reach out to me directly. We are hiring at the moment, so you can reach out, and you can even just pretend that you're an engineer looking for a job, and I'll probably spill all the beans. But I'm going to kick off. So probably many of you have seen these stats before. I come very much from the medical side of things. So there's a huge consumer part of neurotechnology, and I respect that side of this field. It's not the side of the field that I'm on at all. So I'm going to be speaking to you through the medical lens. Neurological disorders, numbers from the UN, are said to affect 1 in 6 people. This covers dementia, epilepsy, stroke, brain cancers, all these nasty things that affect us throughout the life. And the economic burden of this is completely huge. It's more than $1 trillion per year globally now, and it's set to rise dramatically. And there's a hell of a lot of technologies that we can use to interface with the body, with the nerves, but I'm going to focus on the brain primarily for this presentation. And these go from very non-invasive technologies such as FNIRS and EEG, the sort of technologies that we see a lot more prevalently in consumer-grade applications, where we don't have to cut large holes into the skull and dig into the brain deeply. And then they go into these far, far more invasive technologies that are great for understanding the neuroscience, the brain, deep questions that we have that we need to get answers to. But perhaps are far less applicable to medical interventions where we want to reduce the risk to the patient. I think the first take-home message I would really like to disseminate here is there's going to be no winner-takes-all technology in this space, right? Even within the medical field, different indications require different sensitivities, different selectivities, different types of intervention. And when we get asked by investors, well, what are you going to do about Synchron? We say Synchron's an incredible technology. We're doing something very different. And they will own one part of what they're doing, and we'll own ours. And there'll be several other companies that come out and technologies that come out and take on this, what is sure to be a multi-billion dollar, pound, euro market as it emerges. So, big trigger warning here. I'm going to show you a picture of an open brain. If you don't like that kind of stuff, look away right now. But this is the kind of stuff that we're trying to avoid. These are the kind of conventional technologies that are used right now for mapping and for understanding and for treating the brain. On the left, you see SEEG probes to put into a pediatric patient, and these are used usually to map epileptic zones, so usually for epilepsy patients. This is what the industry classes as minimally invasive. On the right, you can see a classic ECOG grid. This is used for interoperative recordings and stimulating during brain surgeries, for example, in brain cancer operations. I didn't just want to show you these pictures to frighten you and to gross people out over their dinner or drinks, depending on where you are in the world. But I want to show you these pictures to really hit home that these electrical recordings are super valuable. The surgeons, the clinicians, and the patients believe these recordings and stimulations that you can use these devices for are really, really important. And patients will go through these kind of horrific, really, operations to get that information. So one of the questions that our lab tries to wrangle with is, how do we interface these traditionally hard electronics, these platinum discs and steel rods and all these kind of things, with your soft and squishy body? It might not surprise many of you to know that when you look at the gelatinous brain or these soft pliable nerves, they don't like having metals and silicon shanks shoved into them. So it's something we focus on a lot. In the inset picture there, you can see a polymer-based electrode sat on the bubble. We have many pictures of this electrode just drifting over the surface of that bubble and the bubble not popping. We develop a ton of different technologies, or I should say, and our ex-member of the lab develops a ton of these kind of technologies using thin films of metal and also conductive polymers as well. We use soft plastic and polymer substrates that can go down to microns in thickness, so 1/10 of the thickness of a human hair. We can use these for sensing technologies. We can also use them for traditional electrophysiology, so measuring those electrical signals from the brain. And then using these applications that have been lifted from the world of silicon, we can pattern electrodes onto them, so we can use thousands and thousands of electrodes on the tip of these devices. Something else we use in the lab quite commonly is organic electronics. So we use primarily PEDOT-PSS and other materials where we can make transparent electrodes. So electrodes that can record electrical activity whilst using a microscope to record, for example, like calcium imaging or something like this. What you can see on the images on the left there is a lotus flower with a flexible electronic interface on it. And then in B, you can see that device sat on the surface of the brain, recording activity from a rat's brain. These are using an active type electrode, like a transistor-based electrode. And what we can get there is very, very high amplification and high signal to noise. So on the little graphs at the bottom, you can see there's the blue and the black lines there are traditional silicon-based or metal-based shanks, and the pink is this sort of natively amplified polymer-based electrode, where we get much, much higher, cleaner signal. And if you're an AI person on this call, as I know there often are, you want that kind of data. You don't want that garbage, noisy data to go into your model that makes it very, very difficult to train. The image on the right there is very similar sort of fabrication process to make these devices, but we have a series of biosensors there as well. So we can do things like measure calcium, potassium, even drugs as well, to try to measure how much drug is getting to a certain part of the brain, for example. To give you another example of the kind of thing that we're trying to replace, in the images in the top left, we have sort of traditional spinal cord stimulators. So these are polymer-based electrodes made of polymer-based substrates that are made of silicone, and they have rigid platinum electrodes. And these are the same devices that have been used since the 60s, sort of championed by Medtronic and Boston, and they work. You know, the surgeons are quite happy holding them, placing them. They're connected to these IPGs and batteries that sit further away, and you can deliver a nice current pulse. And these are used to treat pain. And I think, Alex, you mentioned the work that's being done by Onward as well. They'll use these sort of technologies, these silicon-based platinum technologies. What we're then looking at is how you can modify that to make these devices far more minimally invasive. So what we established was a polymer substrate that we could pattern with gold electrodes, wrap it up into a needle, deliver it through a very fine needle insertion onto the surface of the spinal cord, and then unfurl using pneumatic pressure onto the spinal cord. The benefit to the patient, of course, is the fact that they don't have to have a very risky surgery. For example, complex laminectomies where you remove part of the bone, which many patients just are not suitable for or qualified for. So if you're particularly old or you're prone to infection, surgeons are not likely to carry out that kind of operation. And these kind of applications are really only possible with these kind of new fabrication techniques, photolithography in the case of this, but also sort of laser ablation, cutting down layers of polymer and layers of metals very, very thin, so that you can manipulate them and roll them up and sort of apply what we use here, which is sort of like soft robotics on these devices. Is just another example of the kind of sensors that we use. We can wrap them around the spinal cord, again, because they're so thin, so flexible. Rather than having a bulky sort of 1 to 2 millimeter interface that we wrap around the spinal cord, this would cause damage to the spinal cord. We can place these very, very thin films around the spinal cord and start to map interesting information in a full 360 degrees circumferential way, which is data that people aren't usually able to access. The kind of exciting thing about this is that you have lots of interesting, on the little image here, in these larger tracks at the top, you've got lots of interesting sensory information, for example, touch, pain, temperature, this kind of information. All of the motor information is on the lateral part of the spinal cord, and this ventral part, the sort of front of your spinal cord, closer to your sternum. That information is super interesting if you're looking at, for example, spinal cord injury, and you want to look at that descending information to get people moving again, or using their bladder again, or restoring sexual function. And the slightly overwhelming, perhaps, diagram on the right is just looking at some of the studies we did where we placed very, very small sensors around the spinal cord and measured using sort of elicited motor function from the brain, and then peripheral stimulation from the sciatic nerve and other nerves. And then we can actually measure where that information is and start to quantify what we're getting. The inset image is actually showing sort of pain stimulus, and you can actually see the sensory fibers firing up, and then a split second later you get the descending motor tracks firing, which is sort of suggesting a reflexive arc that we're monitoring here. So, natural question, and I would hope someone would ask this in the Q&A on this talk, is great. These technologies sound wonderful. Why is everybody still using silicon-based and platinum-based technologies? Well, for sure, there's some just general inertia in the field. There's some maybe of the innovators dilemma where some of these large incumbents don't want to switch these technologies because they're doing quite well and making quite a lot of money. But of course, there's no free lunch, right? There are drawbacks. We spend a lot of our time with surgeons and clinicians. And if you've ever seen a surgeon or a clinician handle one of your beautiful, delicate, tiny devices, they're quite rough with them and they move them around and they break them quite easily. There are other technical challenges, of course. There's a challenge that many people may have heard of before around stability of these devices. So how do you keep these things stable and functional for 10 years, minimum in some cases? When you have a big chunk of platinum, that kind of just becomes like you just can do that. You get etching of the platinum over time, but you've got several hundred microns of material to get through. That's fine. When you're working with these devices where you have maybe nanometers of material to get through, it's very, very easy for that material to be etched away and to no longer function. There are a ton of other pros and cons of these technologies. Feel free to ask in the Q&A, or again, feel free to reach out to me and I will gladly tell you all of the secrets that I know. As I said, I'm going to give you a very, very short tease on what we're doing at Opto.bio. Opto.bio is a spin out from the University of Cambridge. We just closed our round just before Christmas, which is why I'm having to be a little bit quiet about what we're working on at the moment. But we're developing injectable technologies to measure and to manipulate the biology. That is, technologies that can sense and stimulate, and we use them across the body, but we're using them in the brain as the first protocol. I think probably I can summarize what we're working on at Opto.bio by looking at these words. We're developing smaller, we're developing softer, wider and wireless technologies, smaller sensors that we can pack and smaller devices that we can pack into needles that can be delivered into the body through very, very minimally invasive surgeries opening up wider indications. Softer technologies that the body likes to, is far more comfortable accepting, and you get far less scar tissue build up at the interface between the device and the brain. When I describe wider, I mean wider in terms of the indications. There are many, many indications which we speak to neurologists and speak to neuroscientists, and they'd love to use these kind of technologies in them. But quite frankly, there are many cases where a patient or a clinician is not going to put their patient up for a large craniotomy, and the risks that are associated with that. We want to challenge that. And finally, these devices are wireless. We're developing a wireless system in which ports don't need to protrude through the skin or through the brain. And we're taking away the need for this sort of can that is usually used, this large IPG that sits somewhere in a bored hole in the skull or down near the chest. So from our first round of funding, we're working on validating our technology platform. Again, I'm not going to describe that technology platform to you right now, though if you are reading between the lines of this presentation, you'll probably get a sense of what it's inspired by. We're working with several clinical collaborators around the world now, validating that technology in the brains of animals, and then we'll be looking towards first in human interoperative first. There's several indications that we've identified that we'll be optimizing for over the next year. As I mentioned, our platform is going to be validated for recording and stimulation first in the brain. I think the very exciting part of our technology as well is that we're exploring mixed chemical and electrical sensing, which has profound utility actually in some cases, for example, in mental health, depression, and also in epilepsy. That is the end of this whistle-stop tour through our lab and Opto.bio. As I mentioned, we are hiring engineers. Please reach out to either me or my co-founder Elise, and we will gladly have a chat. We like speaking to people, and especially like speaking to people who are excited by this field as we are. Thank you. It appears my host has left me. I hope I didn't bore her.
Thank you, Ben. That was really an amazing presentation.
Yes, thank you, Ben. I think Mark will be taking over now for the next intro.
Are there any questions for Ben from his amazing talk? Anything in the pipeline for neurological dysphagia?
There isn't right now, but if you're interested in this space, again, please reach out and I'm happy to have a chat.
Excellent. So what's the best way to be in contact with you?
You can email me, ben@opto.bio. I think I can I post this in the chat to everyone? Hosts and panelists, everyone. Here you go.
Mm-hmm.
Feel free to drop me an email. I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn. We're in Cambridge. We're in the original Cambridge in the UK. We've already tricked a couple of people thinking we're in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We're not. If that affects your decision to reach out.
Cool, excellent. Well, thank you again for the fabulous presentation.
Thank you.
We're going to be moving on briefly to introduce NTX Services. Let me share my screen. So very happy to introduce NTX Services, specifically Adam, Radhika, and Sydney are going to be here to take you through NTX. Adam, would you like to take over?
Sure. I'll take over. Thanks. So Yeah, so thanks for the introductions. As mentioned, so NTX Services is the exclusive partner of NeuroTechX. For those we don't know, that means that, for example, the NeuroTech job board, which is on the NeuroTechX job board, has been supported by NTX Services. The management of that has been a portion of NTX Services revenues also is provided back to NeuroTechX to support Buzz and Review and other innovations. So we've essentially been working very, very closely. So what do we do? You can consider our services and support in three categories: general advisory, from strategy, product development, financing also is a big one with fundraising support. We do quite a bit of recruiting also. So anything and everything on the technical, scientific, and business side are things we provide. We provide them across a variety of neurotechnology companies. Geographically, there's no restriction. We have clients all around the globe, and also from digital therapeutics to invasive neurotech. We've been working with companies of different scales, of different technologies, of different and targeting different indications. So with that in mind, I'm just going to share a couple of slides before letting Radhika present some of the insights and trends that we wanted to share with you. Very quickly, so I alluded to our services a little bit. One way to think about what we do is, kind of the wheel, if I can call it that you can see on the screen. Essentially, when we think about what it takes for a company to do well in neurotech, it's not just about the business side, it's not just about the tech side. There's really kind of an evolving paradigm where you need to have very strong foundation of neuroscience and research. You need to do proper product development, obviously clinical trials, regulation, and insurance coverage and reimbursement that are very big topics that have an impact on one another. And as you can see on the left side, obviously there are many business considerations too. So we can tackle all of that. We have our internal team, which is growing quite a bit. We have external partners also that we work very closely with. So any company, lab, startup, or investor in the field can feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be more than happy to discuss how we can support you. In terms of insights, so this is a small update on Alex's slide from earlier. I think this is the full 2022 stats. The other one was up to November, if I'm not mistaken. So, pre-post money, interesting numbers there. However, if you look at the median deal size, only 4 million. This is namely indicative of the fact that many companies were looking for bridge rounds this year. So not necessarily the largest raises, even though valuations were at decent amounts, maybe not what they were earlier that year, but it's still interesting to show that there are deals happening in the field. But 2022 was definitely not the year, aside from a couple of, larger deals where companies we talked to and, were aiming for the very, very big round. Many actually had to reassess. We'll publish more specific results in that regard later this year. We did this last year. We're going to do it again, where we're going to go more in depth regarding the different series of raises, the types of deals, the sub-industries that are targeted, and essentially the different trends in that regard. One last point before I leave the mic to Radhika. So we looked, in terms of the statistics of those deals, where were they? Interestingly, if you look at the top side, aside from the other category, you can see there was a good mix from, diagnostic, therapeutics, software, and devices. One thing that we've noticed that's quite interesting on the diagnostic side is there's more and more evolution in that regard. And there's quite a bit of a, debate regarding, assessment tools versus diagnostic tools. What are they targeting? Facilitation through AI solutions. There's been quite a bit of innovation, not just on the treatment side, but on the diagnostic side from, different conditions that people are trying to address better, address more efficiently, with less costly methods. So we're probably going to hear quite a bit more in 2023 in that regard. And in terms of the sub-industries or, adjacent industries that are targeted, if you look at the bottom, life sciences, digital health, AI, medtech, this only shows that there's a good variety of transactions and activity across neurotech. And that also supports our thesis that neurotechnology is not just about something very complex and invasive. It's also not just, about digital and software and AI. There's really a good mix of technologies that can also interact with one another. So with that in mind, I'll stop sharing, and Radhika, I'll let you present.
Yeah, so I think at this point, we'll just really try to have an open conversation about some of the trends that we're seeing throughout the year. So the first thing that we noticed is that investors are there's more capital influx into the industry, as you could see from the previous slide, especially into the invasive fields. I think people have talked to death about the Synchron deal already. That's just one example of what has happened this year. And that's largely because investors are now ready to take more long-term risks and invest in neuromodulation and neuroprosthetics. I think, though, it's really important for people to understand that regardless of where they are with their raises, most of the tech will not really be ready for human use for another 5 to 10 years. If we're talking about great seeds, in October 2022, Axoft, a company which, if it's not on your radar, should be, raised about $8 million in seed funding. So they've developed malleable yet resistant neural implants that are as soft as the brain, and they're going to use some of their preclinical studies with the FDA and for the creation of prototypes with this funds. The Synchron fundraise has already been talked about. I think something we wanted to demystify is that although these very large fundraisers seem like they speak to company valuation, it's also important to understand that going all the way from concept development to market approval is a process that in itself costs about $100 million. So a $75 million raise in that context is about just what you need. And that really segues into our next observation, that investors are still very uncertain about the regulatory pathway and the reimbursement methods, especially for something as novel as brain implants. I think in this regard, larger medical device companies can really help by setting predicates, which may help the landscape become much more attractive for startups. So, for example, Abbott received the FDA's breakthrough device designation for DBS for depression. It's possible that this could open up a new regulatory and reimbursement pathway for novel startups in the space. We're also seeing an increase in other forms of funding. So, for example, in 2022, we saw the largest amount of capital raised, not from a traditional VC, but from a PE firm, which was about $1.5 billion, taking Natus Medical, which was previously public, to a private company through an LBO. So effectively, Natus Medical develops a wide range of medical products and software solutions, spanning from neurological, newborn care, and hearing. And essentially, the sale of Natus Medical to Archimed will essentially provide shareholders with immediate value, but also a compelling premium. And the goal is really to kind of look for efficiencies within the company and help make it more profitable in the long run. I think the influx of let's say non-traditional players like PE into neurotech is exciting, because it means that the field is maturing enough that there are companies that are advanced enough where people are looking for efficiencies, not just getting the product out to market. And I think this speaks to kind of the long journey we've taken from the 1600s, when scientists first began to research the brain and bioelectric signals, to today, where brain implants are being brought into more and more mainstream conversations. We've seen articles this year in the New York Times, the Post, et cetera, that speak to it. And I think this is really indicative of how far the field has advanced. So on the technology side, our team went to a few conferences this year, and we realized that peripheral nervous system, VNS, and TES, and many more indications are being investigated. So the new targets include inflammation and pancreatic cancer. So one example is Novocure, which uses TES in electrical fields to disrupt tumor progression and kill cancer cells, essentially targeting abdominal cancer. Another example is Setpoint Medical, which targeted electric pulses using VNS to trigger the intrinsic inflammatory reflex for autoimmune conditions. Then under DBS and spinal stimulation, many new methods are emerging. One example would be Saluda Medical, which directly measures the spinal cord's physiological response to stimulation for smart neuromodulation. This product is already FDA approved, so it's much more advanced as well. We're also seeing an increase in the minimization of risks associated with implantable devices. And I think Ben's earlier presentation was kind of just one example in a much larger trend. So we are seeing more and more safer materials and form factors being explored to reduce the side effects associated with traditional technologies. We were actually working with a couple of, many soft implantable companies that one of which is 1,000 times softer and 2 times thinner than the current electrodes, and another one that is developing products that can be placed beneath the skull or under the skin in a simple outpatient procedure. On the commercialization side, we are really seeing an emergence of the combination of neurotech with other industries. If we want to think about where neurotech could be, I think it would be a shame to limit it to purely the medical use cases. And we're beginning to see neurotech play a critical role in improving human experiences across multiple dimensions. So in March 2022, you had Emotive, Usalon, and L'Oreal's technology incubator. And they had formed a strategic partnership to create a device for personalized fragrances. I think having other industries try to understand the human brain will really play a key part in making neurotech more mainstream. In June 2022, MindMaze and Alfa Romeo's F1 team, Orlen, formed a strategic partnership to boost the safety and human performance using its MindDrive platform. I believe Mercedes is also working on human safety using neurotech as well. And then we're further also seeing a continuation into the development of consumer devices. There is potential in this area, but I think finding the right balance between effectiveness and accuracy and value still proves to be challenging. The customer acquisition costs tend to be high, and it's very difficult to prove to a consumer the real need for a neurotech device when compared to the entire universe of wearables, and that's something companies need to keep in mind. So the industry will likely have to continue to develop products that can be easily integrated into daily life. And then lastly, we're seeing an increase in companies looking to improve data collection, processing, and algorithms. So if you're a new entrepreneur thinking of starting a new company in the field, you're not necessarily limited to a product company. You could easily create a service company that builds software solutions or other forms of data that improves data collection, processing, and algorithms. So one example of an acquisition in this space was BlackRock acquiring Mindex. So Mindex will essentially integrate their spatial AR and AI computing software with BlackRock's BCI hardware, bolstering BlackRock's existing software portfolio and essentially enhancing, one would hope, the ability of their neural interfaces to actually interact with the human brain. Yeah, and I think that that's essentially the wealth of trends we're seeing. We're working with a lot more different types of technologies here at NTX Services and companies at different life stages. Things have been progressing well on our end. You can see that we're hiring as well. So we did have a position out in December that's closed now, but we were thrilled with the response and we're very happy with the candidates. If you're the kind of person who wants to is still in that explorative phase of their career and just wants to work on multiple different kinds of technologies and companies and challenges, I think we're probably the right organization for someone who enjoys variety and new challenges on a day-to-day basis.
And thank you for all the hearts. Very appreciated. Not sure if Mark or Brian's taking over, but I think that concludes our session.
Great. Thank you very much, Adam. That was really a nice way to, I think, bring everything together. We do have some very interesting questions we'd like to bring up to you. Maybe I'll kick this off. So can you talk a bit about how neurotech devices can be integrated in the field of AR and VR?
Sure. Yeah, just give me 1 second. Yes, absolutely. Well, obviously, if you think about AR, VR, neurotech integration, the Gallia is something I think that many people know. There have been other, again, I think, innovations there. This goes back, I think, in our mind to what is the objective and what are you trying to achieve, right? I mean, is this for research purposes? Is this for gaming purposes? Is it for control purposes? People might also be aware of cognition, right, which is an assistive device tool. They got an interesting funding about 1.5 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, which allowed them essentially to have augmented reality mixed with EEG in order to have more accurate readings and support for people, for example, with cerebral palsy that have a hard time communicating. So there's definitely a lot of potential there. I think that what we see and where we see companies do well is when there's a clear positioning. So it's not about AR and VR with neurotech for the sake of doing that. It's about I am an assistive device, or I am a support to application X or application Y. I could provide the same comment, I would say, in general for many companies with very complex technology. More and more, even on the invasive side, we're seeing a lot of companies come to us and say, hey, I have a very interesting technology, but at this point, I need to be pretty clear on what use cases I'm going to tackle. I think Ben alluded to that, right, in terms of down the road, kind of having that clarity in terms of the objective. I would say that we're seeing kind of the same, I would say, focus or more and more focus when it also comes to BCI and AR, VR, and the two big trends being, I think, assistive devices and kind of gaming and entertainment, with the first one maybe having a bit more traction and funding, but I'm quite curious to see where the second one's going to head.
Maybe a quick follow-up there. Are therapeutics receiving more funding than maybe some of these more commercial companies?
Yes, yes, therapeutics tend to receive more funding than the more commercial companies and more than diagnostics as a whole. That's what we've observed just following the fundraising trends. And I think that's largely because there's possibly a feeling among investors that there's a captive audience ready for a therapeutic solution that's immeasurably better than the current standard of care. However, something to keep in mind is that all of these companies, even once they kind of have all of their concept development done, even after they reach the right key opinion leaders, et cetera, excuse me, patient access remains a challenge, and it's an aspect of company development that's often overlooked. We find many companies who don't decide on their use case early on and have a clear understanding of their end consumer, in this case patients, and the clinicians that they work with, tend to struggle with the market access question.
Thank you very much. And maybe more generally, what is the average recruiting timeline for US-based hires when you're supporting companies for engineers and software development?
Yeah, so we've done quite a few of these projects, and I'm glad we have Sydney here on the call. I mean, she's been kind of a key actor within the team when we supported recruiting. So we have for us, there's 3 ways, right? I mean, if anyone wants to post a job on the job board, I would say anyone can do it, and it's free. We have visibility packages also, which provides visibility on social media and our newsletter, which obviously can improve the number and the quality of candidates, or I would say the relevance of the candidates that apply in this space. We also do a headhunting types of projects where we actively draw people from our database of talent, from the different resources that we have internally. So what we've been able to do when it comes to headhunting for senior software, hardware engineers or CTOs, also sometimes kind of very senior roles, we've been doing it within 1 to 2 months. We've been able to close positions, and not just in the US, also across Europe. So that's something we're very proud of. When it comes to other positions and kind of, statistics on the job board, in the same way we talked about providing some stats later this year on fundraising, we'll probably publish something on what we've seen in the job market. But in general, where we see a lot of movement, I would say at the internship level or the junior positions, we've seen sometimes a lot of traction, a lot of applicants. And in general, companies we talk to are highly impressed when it comes to kind of the quality, especially for people involved with NeuroTechX, for example, and the knowledge that people already have, even at a junior level. From mid to senior roles, this is where we get more asks for headhunting projects to support companies, because it's not always obvious. And for instance, we're seeing even more cross-border questions where a company in a country X is asking us about potentially getting candidates from, across the ocean and talent, because they want someone that really has the relevant experience, which in Neurotech, as everyone can imagine, is not always that common, right? To have 5, 8, 10, or even more years of experience in a given field. So I would say junior positions, there's a lot of volume and traction and kind of activity. More senior positions, companies tend to have a bit of a harder time typically closing their positions.
Great, thanks very much. Maybe as a overall feeling, are a lot of the initial innovations coming out of universities and then translating to spin-offs? And essentially, what engagement do you have with them at that level?
That's a great question, Mark. And that's a question I'm going to say that we don't quite have the answer to yet, because we have noticed that there are a lot more lab spin-offs, as you say, developing and getting initial funding. Where I think they're struggling is developing into fully fledged companies, right? So we kind of see them make it through their initial rounds of funding, get into kind of the valley of death, as it were, and not necessarily make it much further. We would like for all of these companies to essentially, what we like to do with all of these companies is kind of give them a sense of, hey, these are the areas in which you'll need to develop your team, develop your skills, so that they don't fall into that valley of death.
Nice, very interesting. Thanks for your perspective. Just informally, is there any example you'd like to share about how you assisted some companies without divulging any confidential information that you are really proud of?
Sure. So first of all, I would encourage everyone to track the newsletter for NTX Services, or to go on our website. The newsletter has our most recent presentation. So we have 6 examples of projects out there on our website. Also, we need to update it a bit, but we have detailed business cases. So as you said, trying to keep things confidential while talking about what we did. But in general, I would say that a lot of the work we do often starts with a variety of questions, right? It can be a strategic questions and companies saying, I have a technology, I want to know what the use cases I should look at. I want to understand the use cases, whether my tech is aligned with the use case from a feasibility perspective, right? On the engineering and neuroscience side, I want to understand the market size. We've done a lot of projects where we also look, in distribution channels and kind of very detailed strategy of, which countries could you go to? What does the government support or the reimbursement landscape look like in those countries? What is the competition that you have from a strategic and a technical standpoint? So on the market analysis, on the go-to-market strategy, on the technical feasibility, we've done some patent landscape reviews. We've done really, I would say, a broad set of work. And often what happens with the clients we work with is that, these initial pieces of work lead to questions about, I'm thinking about my Series A, I want to raise, I want to plan ahead. Can you support us there? And in that regard, we've actually applied for a broker-dealer license in Canada. We have a plan for an expansion of that because, on one end, we talk to investors, on the other, we work with a lot of companies. But, until we get a license, which we're very, very close of getting, we were very careful about not, impeding on regulation, i.e. not making formal introductions and leading fundraising rounds. So we've done a lot of strategy and technical work. We've helped companies that with our work have managed to kind of raise very interesting amounts, but in the coming month, we'll be essentially transitioning to a full service entity where we will also run fundraising rounds for our clients and help them essentially conclude the rounds and help them with, all the preparation, the negotiation, and very importantly, finding the best investors out there, because we have a very good sense of, who's looking for what, and hopefully we can kind of help companies give them the right answers and the right preparation based on, technologies that are very aligned with investors' preferences and thesis.
Wow, that's really interesting. Actually, I think we might have to contact you after the meeting.
Sounds great.
Question also from Jake. This is also really interesting. As many startups are working in this field, there's sometimes a lot of patents floating around with technologies, and sometimes it's more about executing in a use case or in a product. What is the impact on market entry? As a new company, do you have to have patents in place or IP in place beforehand, or do you see a lot of potential for new companies to enter into the neurotech space?
I think a lot of that depends on the type of technology and the type of market. Let's say you're a DTX solution and software that can be easily replicated. You may want to have a patent right earlier on in your life cycle. If you're a more complex solution, I think there's more room to kind of stagger out your patent strategy. But typically, investors like to see at least one patent application or some form of in-house innovation. And there are reasons for that. And I think the reason for that, beyond protecting the company's rights, is also, things don't always work out in business, as we all know. In case something happens, it always provides kind of like a floor for the liquidation value, right? Because you have the value of the patent to rely on.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely a point there. I saw the question on the Q&A, which is interesting. The notion of too many hammers, not enough nails, it's becoming more and more prominent, right? I mean, if you look at the BCI neurotech field 5-7 years ago, you came up with a solution, you were trying to commercialize it. It was kind of new, and then now we've prepared a database. NeuroTechX has put together a database with BrainMind. And I think we have over 2,000 entries. It's on the NeuroTechX website for those who don't know. And that's one example. So like if you look at, I have a solution leveraging, these techniques of, modulation or these approaches of imaging, you'll realize you have a lot of methods for that. And you have a lot of companies trying to kind of use the methods. And that's where, when we work with clients, we try to dig a little bit, right? So what do they do? Do they have patents? Do they have a clear application? Do they have a trial there? Do they have data from patients? And so the devil's in the details, right? Because today, just having a technology, which I think was part of the Q&A question, is just not nearly enough. And that also goes back to kind of a lab spin-off question too. Some labs have a remarkable technology they're putting together, but when we talk with companies and lab spin-offs, we say, look, let's look at the use cases early, or at least let's think about it, because a technology for the sake of a technology is just not going to impress an investor as much as it might have a couple of years ago. So it's a mix, as Radhika said, it's very nuanced, but even if it's not about working with us, even for someone doing their own research, I would encourage them to look at the databases that exist now. For example, the one that NeuroTechX did with BrainMind, to say, okay, if I'm coming up with something, what else is out there? And we've seen many companies kind of being heavily surprised, believing they have something unique, and taking a step back, and we kind of have a discussion about, have you looked at these 10 players and the fact that they have X, they've commercialized in Y, they have a patent in that country, and there are often a lot of surprises. So I'm not saying that kind of work is easy to do for someone just coming up with a technology and trying to assess what's out there. But unfortunately, or fortunately for the field, it has become necessary to really make that effort to understand what is there, because you might be working on something for a while and realize that there's already something doing it maybe even better and more, and which is more advanced than whatever a company is trying to accomplish.
Yeah, maybe just to add on that from my perspective, I've been talking to a lot of neurotech companies, doing a lot of things like non-invasive BCI. And I think what's really critical in 2023 is to really get better product market fit. So like you say, not having a technology, but having a solution to a problem, solving that problem with neurotechnology. And I think if we do that with a couple of companies, it's really going to open the doorway to go from just therapeutics to more of the consumer-based applications. But I think as you said, Radhika, it's going to take a couple of years to really get there and integrate it. That's really still a new.
Yeah, and I think Mark, like just to touch on what you said, I think you brought up a really great point, and I hope that the rest of the group leaves with that. When we talk to investors, there's really only two things they want to understand. The first is what you described, the market opportunity. So what is the product market fit? What is the size of that market, et cetera? And the second is the technological risk. And, this shows that investors are cognizant that, they're not expecting all of the product development to go perfectly, but they want to fully understand the risk. So it's really important for a founder to be honest and kind of assess the risk and convey it to investors so that they can together think of mitigation strategies.
That also brings up, actually, that's a nice segue into some of the questions we didn't really answer yet. So one is, what's the biggest blocker for the development of BCI tech this year? And where do we see some of the best potential for funding and development? I mean, if we consider what you just said.
Okay, so the biggest blocker for BCI tech, I think that depends on what you define as BCI tech. Are we talking invasive solutions that are medical? Are we talking non-invasive solutions? Because there are different blockers at each stage, right? The risk is very different for each of these technologies. In the medical space, I think the biggest hurdle tends to be everything associated with the regulatory pathway. So clinical trials, so getting your patient recruitment, all of that tends to be a blocker. The second thing tends to be figuring out whether you need to go through the pathway for a novel device, so a PMA pathway, or if you can leverage something else in 510K to get to a beachhead market. Or, and then finally, it tends to be, well, can we even have the solution reimbursed, right? Is there an economic argument for having the solution reimbursed? The last one is something that BCI companies, or as we know them, are still struggling with. Obviously, it's different for the other three technologies, but I assume the person was talking about implantable solutions, so I kept the discussion to that.
Yeah, and essentially what this says is, yes, technology can be a blocker, but I think if all the cards are put together well, right? And again, if you try to raise funds to an investor to say, look, this is what I have, this is what I'm trying to go, this is my path, these are the risks, if you're honest about it and there's really an edge, you're really doing something which has the right product market fit, the market's big enough, you might get the funding necessary. But in that regard, what we think a mistake is sometimes is hoping that by having low cost and, hey, I'll get to market fast and it's not going to cost me a lot, and hopefully investors will be excited by that, is one of the mistakes we've seen a lot, because it shows that you, as Radhika said, you're not realistic about the risks and what it actually requires to get there. So if the whole solution, if as a whole the project or the company makes sense and you can prove that point, you have the right team to execute, or you have the right growth plan, you might actually get the funds and then actually get to the market. So one of the hurdles is not being realistic, or trying to kind of cut down on some of the analysis, or pretending the costs are not going to be there, or assuming the market's much bigger than it is, rather than being honest with yourself as a company, doing the best planning possible and showing that thesis and convincing an investor. Because then if you get the funds, at least everyone's aligned on where you want to get. Whereas, an investor will be very much turned off if they see a plan that is very unrealistic / way too optimistic. They want someone to dream, but they don't want them to dream in a way that might not materialize for their investments.
and I think something to keep in mind is there's this feeling where you have companies that pulled off very extraordinary seeds, like let's say Axoff with their 8 million seed, that that it was more about the network, etc. I think something to keep in mind is many times when companies pull off feats like this, they're usually pretty advanced. So they've done the work in terms of assessing correctly the market opportunity and the technological risk, and done a very good job of communicating that to investors as well.
Yeah, I think it's a really awesome discussion we've been having. We are, I think, coming somewhat close to the official endpoint. But there's also some really good questions. We could later continue in the NeuroBar, but maybe we could end with this one from Jack. Is there ever room for a Me Too product to compete with existing technologies in the space? Or is there always a need for a significant differentiating factor? And would a similar tech be used in a new use case be enough?
Well, I think so. The way we think about competition is quite different. We don't necessarily think you need a massive competitive moat every single time. I don't think that we would go so far as saying that a Me Too technology is good enough unless you're looking at a radically different market, let's say a completely different geography, or a completely different use case could potentially work if you have a way to really nail the sales and distribution channel. So that means nailing all of the early key opinion leaders in terms of clinicians, the patients, getting the right medical distributors, etc. All of that essentially ahead of your competitor.
Yeah, and
I think it's certainly possible, but it's just a more dangerous game to play because your competitor, who may be more advanced, could easily develop, the economies of scale are such that developing a new use case costs less than developing your first one, right? So your competitor could easily switch over and see a market opportunity that they didn't earlier as well. So that's essentially the risk associated with it. But I would not see two people working on the same thing and say for sure that one is likely to be a winner versus the other.
yeah, and if we think about EEG devices to take an easy target for the Me Too, kind of question, I think we've evaluated 40 plus of them, and sometimes you can find devices that might not be as elaborate, or where the technical specs might not be superior to others, but they got so much data that they have better algorithms, better software, or to Radhika's point, they've identified their markets well, they have a use case which is very well defined, they have trials. So it's really a mix, but Me Too, in the sense of replicating everything, does not make sense. But saying, hey, I think my device doing X or my solution doing X can be applied to new use cases, to new types of patients, or nuances. I have data because I have partnerships. I have partnerships with clinics. Like, all of that is very, very interesting. And no one should be deterred just by figuring out that, oh my God, there's another technical solution that looks like mine. Can be exactly the same, because you have questions of infringement of patents and other, but it could be similar as long as the end goal and the data and everything around the solution is at least approached a little bit differently. Otherwise, as Radhika said, it would be a little hard for someone to support such an innovation or such an initiative, which is much too similar.
I think something to keep in mind, we actually kind of agree with Ben's view, particularly in the field of medical technology. We don't think it is a winner takes all market at all. We do think that this is, by its very nature, the kind of market that's likely to be fragmented over time. And you kind of see that in mature healthcare and medical device companies as well. Like, they don't all own a single space. They tend to collaborate actually in new spaces, even with the, enormous funding sources they have at their disposal.
And maybe one thing we haven't touched on yet, there are many companies throughout the world doing neurotechnology. Is there a preferred region, given regulatory concerns and funding? Like, where's the best place to actually launch or grow a neurotech company right now?
So, I mean, if you look at just the historical data, one would assume that the US is the best. But we learned some interesting things this year as we were working, with countries in other regions. So, for example, in Japan, if you have a product and you obtain regulatory approval, you automatically obtain reimbursement. So in terms of time to patient access, it might be a much more attractive market. The issue is, of course, that the funding environment is much weaker in Japan, although the government is certainly making efforts to improve that. So that could be one attractive market. In terms of where technology is developed really well, we thought European countries were actually quite advanced. We saw many projects in Europe that were possibly more advanced from a technological perspective than some of their US counterparts, but the funding environment in Europe is not as strong as the US. So it's a question of balancing what you need at different life stages. What we have noticed is that many companies tend to have a distributed strategy. So sometimes they could do their technological advancement in Europe, but do their funding in the US, or vice versa, depending on the type of company it is. There's no reason in 2023, post-COVID, after people have experienced distributed teams, why you can't take advantages of different geographies.
Great. So that's really been an amazing wealth of knowledge and presentations today. I'd like to bring your attention briefly to what's happening day 2. So first of all, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Alex, for also presenting and co-hosting.